Hey, live again. So we've all had some time to digest that Mark Cerny showcase. What an incredible showcase. But now I thought it's been a few months since we last did one of these GDC watch-alongs together. And there's some new videos that have come up, so maybe we'll start digging into those over the next few weeks. This one I thought was pretty interesting. It's level and quest design collaboration from Skyrim to Starfield. I don't love these games necessarily, but I do think the sort of creative process behind them is interesting. It's like that modular kit design video for Fallout 3 and Fallout 4, like how they changed it. I think that's interesting. So hopefully this one gets to be interesting too. Hey! My ears. My sweet, delicate little
Welcome
ears.
Everyone to Level and Quest Design collaboration from Skyrim to Starfield. We're going to
Also, obviously, let me know if audio levels, you know the drill. Hey, Dino Matrix.
be talking about the ways that different areas of design can work together. Your own studio might divide up work very differently. You might have a narrative department. Quest design might do something very differently from level design. Level design might be doing more quest design. Everyone does it a little bit differently. But as long as your studio has 2 or more designers, this talk will have something for you. So I'm Will Shen. I'm the lead content designer for Something Wicked Games. We are a startup with veterans and leadership from Bethesda Game Studios and Obsidian Entertainment. Prior to Something Wicked Games, I was a design director at Bethesda Game Studios. I came up primarily in the quest design department, and by
Blah,
the
blah,
time I was
blah,
at Bethesda
blah,
Game
blah,
Studios, I was working
blah.
on the next generation of design leadership there, with lead systems, quest, and level reporting up to me.
Hey everybody,
I'm here for the
World
soy
Director
chicken.
and one of the co-founders of Soft Brains. We're a small studio of 15 right now, coming from places like Riot, Valve, Sucker Punch, and Sledgehammer Games. We're still early in production of our first title, which is a single-player, first-person sci-fi adventure game.
Soft
When I was at Bethesda, I was
Brains.
primarily a level designer during my time there, but I was also
Hey,
level
you know,
designer for Fallout 4
So, do we want to talk a bit about Starfield? I think we'll get into a Starfield thing in a few minutes, but we'll get into it. I have things to say.
Fallout 76.
So Darl and I
Hi
have
Kai,
worked
hi
together
Axeman.
for a very long career at Bethesda Game Studios for almost 15 years together before we both left.
It's a really
And
beautiful
this talk is
cover.
going to be a retrospective of a lot of our work together, both with each other, but also a lot of our former colleagues. We're going to be talking all the way back to Skyrim, through Fallout 4, Far Harbor, where we were both leads, Fallout 76, and finally for Starfield. Small spoiler warning: there are some spoilers for the ending of Starfield, so just know that.
Oh my god. Guys,
So what do we mean?
guys. I don't want to alarm you, but there are going to be some story spoilers for the ending of Starfield. Now, I don't want to alarm you, because I know many of you are so enamored with the game you haven't gotten to the ending yet. But I just wanted to warn you. There will be some spoilers. Probably more things to say than their design doc for the game.
Mean when we talk about quest and level design. Every shop does it a little bit differently, so let's go over what we mean for our talk for our purposes. So this old-timey Oblivion picture here is to sort of remind us that we are talking about the past. Darl and I no longer work for Bethesda Game Studios. They may do things very differently now, but in the course of our career there, which spanned over 15 years, this is what we generally meant when we talk about quest and level design. So quest design handled dialogue and text, what a lot of
I forget. I have a 20-30 minute script written out about the evolution of quest design from in Fallout. And I think that video could be pretty interesting, but I do kind of want to play the interplay Fallouts in order to have a larger sort of frame of reference for what I'm talking about. Maybe just to sort of broaden the scope of the video too.
places called narrative design, but we were also in the booth with the voice-over actors and directors to provide them with context. Sometimes we would be in there for the entire session. We also handled a lot of the scripting, specifically to make sure that quests move forward. So whenever an objective appears on the screen, that is usually quest scripting telling it to progress. We also worked with all of the NPCs to have them walk around, to come up to you, to speak to you. And finally, the quest design department at Bethesda Game Studios was also the systems design department for a long time. There was no separate systems design department until a few years before we left. And typically what systems design would be there would be specialist quest designers who would do the systems design duty.
When it came to level design on previous Bethesda games, if there was a location in a Bethesda game, typically a level designer owned that location. There can be outliers to this with places like settlements and towns that can often be owned by Quest and supported by World Art. but typically there's a location, a level designer is owning it and doing passes through it. We're also ultimately in charge of the kit pieces and the logic that puts them together, since this is how we build out our locations and our layouts. We work really closely with World Art when coming up with the logic and the systems that define the kits.
Yeah, the original Fallout games.
Responsibilities with Quest when it comes to AI behavior. Our stuff often tends to be on the side of moment-to-moment gameplay and kind of default behaviors. How does a creature react?
As it is, the script is primarily written around Fallout 3 and New Vegas. And I think that's an interesting comparison, because they're using more or less the same systems. They're a bit tweaked, but they're using more or less the same systems. But the way they approach quest design with those same systems and what they use those quests, the sort of experiences they're using those quests to facilitate is very, very different. And it gives you a pretty interesting sort of window into what the developers were thinking.
How can we quickly set them up for patrols or wandering behaviors? We are in charge of most all the combat encounters in the game. Either we own it and are doing passes on it, or we had a hand in layering the combat into a space. We do a lot of environmental storytelling. We're ultimately in charge of how it's done in our location, but we work very closely with World Art when it comes to detailing out our locations to tell these stories. And we do a lot of gameplay scripting, whether it's setting up systems to...
Also, if you can hear sort of a fan sound in the background, I'm really sorry, but I can't turn that off. The cooling in my laptop is non-existent, and I'm currently rendering a bunch of videos, so I need to have an external fan. Hopefully that's not too bad.
Gameplay scripting within our own locations to either add more to the story or make it more memorable in some way. And when it came to collaboration between Level and Quest on previous Bethesda games,
awesome.
Design is in charge of the location, all of the combat NPCs, and any layout decisions that might come up during collaboration. Whereas Quest Design is in charge of all of the narrative, all of the non-combat NPCs, and any story decisions that might pop up.
So now let's take a typical example of this kind of collaboration in action. So let's go back to Skyrim. Specifically, we're going to take a look at a quest called the House of Horrors. This was in Skyrim in the city of Markarth. I worked on this quest with a level designer named D. Langlois, and it's a very simple concept.
You know, on my first playthrough of Skyrim, it's a PlayStation 3 playthrough, I had like 1 million hours clocked into that thing, and that game was so broken. I had like the model, it didn't have any collision, but it had just like the model of a dragon outside in Whiterun, and I just couldn't get rid of it no matter what I did. It was just always there. Everybody in Markarth hated me, and I would always I would go there and they would be like, you have committed crimes against Skyrim and her people, and I had to pay the fine. And I was like, okay, I'll pay the damn fine, stop haunting me. And then, I walked out of the prison and everybody was just aggro again, and they were like, you have to pay another fine. I'm like, excuse me? No, I'm not paying a fine again. And so I started killing a bunch of people, as one does,
Investigate a house. The house ends up being haunted. There's an evil presence that comes from the basement. So Quest Design here handled all the dialogue. There is a primary character that is leading you through the house, so I did all of his dialogue. I also handle all of his behavior, so he comes up to you and he walks you through the house.
Vigilant Tyrannus.
Quest comes up and tells you that it has started and it progresses. That is all the scripting on my end. D was handling layout, but also the scripting for the haunted objects. So all the poltergeisty effects, the camera shake, that was all handled by level design.
Classic
And I want to
Bethesda.
mention art as well. We had a few unique assets for the space, including the alternate basement.
Bro interacted with
There's a
Skyrim.
unique animation for it, and we also did a pass on the lighting and fog effects inside the space. But let's take a closer look at how it was made collaboratively.
Oh, like they would react to there being a dragon in Whiterun with no dragon there? Oh, no. That's not what would happen. The dragon was there. It didn't have any collision. It was just sort of the mesh of the dragon, or just like its body was there. And nobody would react to it. But it still had like physics. So if you like walked into it, I think it had physics. Or maybe it just like had physics when it spawned, because it would maybe like drop from a bit of a height or something. But there was just like the body of a dragon without collision, and it was just like, surely this thing is just destroying my frames. That's more than what I thought. I know it's off topic, but I'm excited. I just got done playing an hour of Bloodborne on my PC at 60 frames per second. Still a few bucks and can crash randomly, but we were close, gents.
So the main
Pretty
character
good.
in the quest is from a faction in the game called the Vigil of Stendar. That faction was actually originally concepted by D.
Also, audio levels are okay?
Encounters in Skyrim, and came to me and said, hey, I am creating a group of witch hunters who are going to be looking for all the evil objects in the game. And since we're working on this haunted house together, it would be great if we tied the two of them together. And I initially said no. I already have a person that I've already come up with a whole biography for. But the more we talked about it, the more it became very clear that there was an opportunity here to ground this character in the world, and also to have it have callbacks to other encounters that you might to. So we worked
That's pretty
together, and
cool.
I came up with the name The Vigil of Stendar. Stendar is the name of one of the gods in Skyrim, so that grounded it in the lore, and I renamed the character and his backstory so that he was part of this faction. When I originally wrote up the quest, I just wrote that it was going to be a haunted house, and that was going to be super fun. But that was all I had. When we actually sat down to work on what that meant together, Dio is the one who pitched the idea of, hey, we have a full physics system. I could script all of the loose objects in the house and just fly them around randomly to simulate a poltergeist. And then as we were working on it, I came up with the idea of, why don't we have the entity speak to you like a ghost as you're progressing through the house? Art also added in some storytelling bits. When we were doing the lighting pass on the space, the effects artist who was working in it was a fan of the Poltergeist movie, and she suggested that we add a little Easter egg of the randomly stacked chairs inside the space. World art also helped with some of the storytelling. I originally had the idea that you get trapped in the basement, and that was just going to be a cage or some other very simple trap. And the world artist assigned to make it came to me and said, I think we have an opportunity here to tie the story together by making an altar to the evil presence actually be the thing that springs the trap, and it's tied into the altar. And again, I originally was hesitant. I felt like that would be a lot more work, but he assured me actually it would.
I can't hear the GDC video at all. It's like 1/4 volumes. Okay. Let's try it like this.
Be easier for him to make it all part of one experience. So one of the big lessons I learned here was we're writing and designing the game together.
I like the feel of the House of Horror quest, especially the reveal of the sacred location, sacrifice location.
I was originally very defensive.
Yeah.
I thought that as I was a new quest designer. This was one of the first quests that I had worked on, and I thought if I didn't have control of everything and have everything perfect in my head, that I was a failure. And so I didn't realize at the time that my colleagues were trying to give me the advantage of their expertise and perspective. And once I let down that wall and started listening to them, that is what made the content so much richer. So this is a very typical example of how we made all the content in Skyrim. We had a piece that we all knew we needed to work on. We sort of came together, everyone added their bits to it, and then we would move on and do another piece.
This is interesting. I've never made Skyrim or a game of equal size or worked on anything like that, but I think it's interesting how you sort of have different compartments or different departments, and you have to sort of encourage them to work together. Because if I was organizing it, just, me, Joe Blow Schmo from the streets, I would think you really want to break everything down in such a way that each person is individually responsible for their stuff, and then you maybe just would do another pass through on everything in order to tie the world together. So like you would merge a character in this quest and a character in this quest. They're kind of similar characters. Why don't we make them like brothers or something and rename them or whatever? But I suppose maybe that's a bit too bureaucratic for people working in a
we were
company.
Also experimenting with other ways to get work done.
So throughout Skyrim, we had several level designers starting to experiment with their own quests, making their own quests with the quest design tools, and just telling stories in that space a little more. This leads to kind of an atypical example that I want to talk about here, where in the case of this example, I'm the level designer working on the location, and there's a different level designer creating the quest that ends up layered through the location. The quest is Lost to the Ages. It's created by Steve Cornett for Skyrim's Dawnguard DLC. Lost to the Ages has you exploring the existing landmass of Skyrim, revisiting some old dungeons as well as some new ones, collecting some quest objects for the end of the quest. I had been working on a location for Dawnguard as well, where all of its story was kind of tied within itself, and it was all visual storytelling mainly. This is the location here, and you approach it, and you feel some earthquakes as you're approaching the exterior. You continue to feel the earthquakes as you explore the interior of this location, and once you get to the main chasm here, you see that the whole dwarven ruin has been split in half by a massive earthquake at some point in the past. You explore the rest of the location, wind through these caverns, fighting Falmer and other creatures until you reach the summit, where there's a massive dwarven machine that you then turn off, and the earthquakes will stop. At some point, Steve must have played through this location or knew about it in some way, and came to me and said, hey, this is a really fun map to play through. What do you think about if I were to add a quest NPC to your location that could kind of be a guide for the player through it, as well as explain some of the overarching Lost to the Ages quest narrative? And I thought that sounded like an awesome idea, so Steve started to layer Katria, a ghost, throughout the location. She starts out as a ghostly voice when you enter the tunnels, telling you to turn back, that it's dangerous here. Once you hit the main chamber, she reveals herself. You see that it's a ghost you've been talking to, and she motions down to her corpse and says, it's dangerous here.
I always struggle with this, with just, you have the player in an environment. How much do you tell them? Like, you have maybe some messages scrawled on the walls, maybe you have a character there leading them through it. It's sort of an interesting idea. Like, how much do you actually want to reveal? I really hate the Skyrim dialogue system, but I've made that rant.
If you say no, she'll end up at the end near that dwarven machine, but if you say yes, she'll kind of follow you through the location fighting Falmer and other creatures as you make your way to the summit. And this made me kind of realize that we actually do have some objects and like unique elements in this location that we could use some explaining to the player, which would benefit us, because this is a little dwarven mechanism that when you impact it in some way, it spins to the top of its pole and then opens a door, unlocks something somewhere else. And we have some visual storytelling here for it, but I was like, hey, Steve, do you think we could mention this to the player through Katria and kind of explain some of this? And he said that sounded good, so he explained some of these elements to the player. They didn't have a name on them, so he named them kinetic resonators, which I thought worked out pretty well. Steve and I collaborated back and forth on different elements like this throughout the location, but it all comes to a head at the end where you're in front of that big dwarven machine. There's 5 of those kinetic resonators placed throughout it, and you need to hit it in a certain order to solve the puzzle, and then the doors will open, the earthquakes will stop, and this part of the quest is completed as well. If you get a bad
I also don't love these. I don't know. I don't love these sort of puzzles in Skyrim. I think that in Skyrim's case, it's probably always just preferable to maybe just give the player like a valve to pull or a key to find or something. I don't know. I just feel like, you know, in game, like I don't feel smart doing this. It always just feels kind of gamey. I don't know.
Some kind of enemy will spawn. There's plenty of visual storytelling around the location where we're explaining the bad things that can happen. But the coolest thing that ended up happening here was Steve layered Katria's story into the location story.
Quests,
saying,
you know, I actually do like, though, quests, puzzles that start quests. I don't like puzzles in quests super much, but I think it was in EverQuest where you're just walking through the world and you can sort of notice little emblems bolted into the ground, or like into the stone slabs on the ground. And if you follow them, you'll realize that they're actually pointing to the next emblem and the next emblem, and you're like, huh, it's like a little breadcrumb trail that you can just follow, and it leads you onto like an interesting quest. I think it was in EverQuest. So I like having to solve a sort of a puzzle in the world in order to uncover a quest, but you know, doing these sorts of pattern recognition tests in the quests, I don't know, this doesn't feel like it's the best for me.
she's the one who put in the wrong pattern that caused a massive earthquake, and it's also why she's dead at the beginning of the location. So that ties in really well with the story I already had for this location. He also layered in a journal onto Katria's corpse that not only explains some Lost to the Ages quest threads you can pick up to find dungeons nearby to keep the quest going, but also final moments from Katria where she writes about this location in her journal and gives the player some hints to starting puzzle solutions at the end. So like I had said, many level designers are learning the quest tools and get more familiar with them, and this starts to develop kind of a shared language between quest and level design, and this language deepens our collaboration going forward onto future projects. So now we're moving forward to Fallout 4, and as I had said, many level designers, including myself, have messed with the quest design tools more and more and are developing that shared language with the quest design team. In this example, I'm going to talk about a larger scale, but back to a more typical example of quest and level collaboration. So the quest is The Last Voyage of the USS Constitution, created by Ferret Bodwin, who sadly passed away during the production of Starfield. Ferret and I were teamed up to work on this location, and he came to me with a pitch of this World War I ship, the USS Constitution, moored on top of a bank here rather than nearby in the water where it actually is in real life, near Boston. And he wanted the player to be able to explore the immediate area of the bank, be able to get inside the interior of the ship and meet the crew members who are robots, and then get to the top deck and meet Captain Ironsides, who's a sentry bot. And Captain Ironsides will ask for help repairing some elements of the ship as well as the rocket engine so he can get this ship back in the water where it belongs. Ferret also pitched some scavengers attacking at the start after you had finished meeting Ironsides, and then periodically throughout the quest as you're returning to repair different elements.
Okay, hey, so here's one. I think exploration in Fallout is much more interesting than exploration in like a fantasy game, you know, going through urban environments and such. But I think the world of an Elden Ring or a Skyrim is always more interesting than the world of a Fallout. So like, I think fantasy is more conceptually interesting, but I think actually exploring the environments is much more better in these urban settings. What's that about? Also, I need to put my phone on silent. 1 second.
This is how the whole quest starts. This is how it's established and everything. What I want to talk about now is Ferret and I's collaboration back and forth as we implemented the elements we kind of knew we wanted in here, as well as pushed on those elements to add to the gameplay and story in different ways. First off, we had the different elements around the ship that you repair, including the engines. I scripted up a system that would just use objects from around Fallout 4 because you pick up all kinds of random junk in Fallout to use the workshop system and craft things. So I layered that into this system, and it worked pretty well. Ferret played through it, and he's like, I like the repair setup, but what if we...
Have I played the Outer Wilds? No, nobody will tell me what it's about.
That could help them bypass the need to go get the resource or expend the resources. They can just repair it outright, and obviously that sounds like a good idea. So Ferret suggested a bunch of stat checks for the different stations.
Also, I just haven't had a lot of time.
A big benefit to the quest. We didn't have a lot of those in other places in Fallout 4. Also, after visiting or talking to Ironsides for the first time and kind of getting your quest intro, future visits to this.
Something I find interesting about quest design like this is it's always interesting to see how you sort of have to gate content, because I'm pretty sure Fallout has jetpacks and you can just sort of fly around. Well, actually, a better comparison maybe is Morrowind to Skyrim, because in Morrowind you can just fly anywhere. You can levitate anywhere and teleport and whatever. In Skyrim you really can't. And that means that you don't, if you want to put the end point of a quest somewhere, or you maybe like, you want the quest to take the player to a specific location, the fact that they can fly anywhere means that they might have already gone there, and then maybe they can like enter the quest in different sequences. So it's interesting how quest design often has you challenge how to constrain not constrain the player's utility of the mechanics, but more you have to sort of push encounters behind walls without obviously just making it behind walls. That's something I did actually really dislike about New Vegas, is because it's just so open from the get-go, you kind of, like, every faction is just like, you have to walk through these long tunnels to talk to everybody, like in the Brotherhood of Steel. You have to, like, or like you want to meet Yes Man or whatever, you have to like go through the Strip, and it's just like everybody's just so deeply tunneled into their location. And I think they didn't really succeed in masking that. Am I making sense here? Maybe I should drink more coffee and get back to this.
The crew members again.
But like there, if you had an NPC encounter on that ship that starts a quest, okay, maybe you need to get a key in order to drop the boat and then create the elevator. But if you have a jetpack, you can just fly up there, which means that getting the key is maybe an optional part of the quest in order to start it for those builds that don't have. You know what I mean?
Maybe how we could solve this. One was to move the fast
and
travel marker to the top
the
of the ship.
more esoteric, weird mechanics your game has, the more you need to be concerned about this, or else you're just going to have to sort of, the whole lunar narrative dissonance of like, yeah, well, now you can't do this, because if we allowed you to use the mechanics you have in this instance, then you would break the game. Is this the Lies of P DLC?
If you wanted to roleplay arriving to the ship and leaving, you still had to deal with trekking all the way up to the top of the ship.
Do horror RPG games exist like Fallout, but with more horror elements? Probably. Yeah, definitely. There's some like. You mean like the 3D Fallout? Because like you have isometric horror RPG games, but it also means like do you mean like they're thematically horror, or do you mean like games like Amnesia where you're running around and you're like scared in the moment? Because I don't think that's really sort of stat management RPG. I don't think that makes for good sort of tension and horror and stuff. Yeah. Aesir at the movies talking about video games. I'm new here, so is this usual? It's not like it. Well, it used to be. It used to be a usual thing I did, where I was just like, we're just streaming GDC talks. It's something to do.
So I pitched
Blind
this
O
idea to work with
Lobster.
Rogue to implement this
Oh,
automated
Blind
robot elevator
Lobster.
that kind of rises you up to the top of the ship when you arrive and takes you back down to the street level when you're leaving. Ferret had also played through the different scavenger attacks, and we were really liking how those were shaping up, but Ferret wondered if there's a way we could add a name or a face to this faction, and if there's a place nearby we could have them hole up and kind of have a little base for them. And I told him there was a good spot where I'd been spawning scavengers already kind of down in an alley, so I worked with World Art to kind of turn some buildings into an old diner that the scavengers had made into a makeshift base. And then Ferret went in and layered in some named NPCs, some dialogue for them, so you can kind of get an idea of why they're doing what they're doing, why they're attacking the ship. And Ferret kept working on this this little chunk of this area with the scavengers, and this ends up turning into a possible quest path where you can actually sabotage Ironsides in the ship, and that'll ultimately result in you getting double.
Didn't play
cross to
Cyberpunk,
take
but
that
it
path.
sounded like its design was at odds with itself. Big open world, it would be fun to be in a flying car, but that's not possible because they really wanted structured quests. Yeah, I didn't get too deep into Cyberpunk. But I don't know, did they market that game as like a Grand Theft Auto, fly around and do whatever, or? Because from memory, all the trailers really emphasized the sort of they always made me feel like it was more of a linear game. Like I didn't really get the RPG feeling from the game. I was kind of surprised that stuff was in there, allegedly. But then just having those cars that can do anything and go anywhere, maybe
And
isn't
also
great
world art
for
was adding a lot
linear
more elements to the
quests.
World War I ship, the USS Constitution.
Because then every
kind of
character has to
expansive,
be in
which
like
cannons
a
were pretty much
bunker,
facing
so
right
you
where
can't
the
just
scavengers were
careen
attacking.
into that.
Everybody who played through this sequence wanted to fire the cannons in some way. So Ferret and I started talking about maybe ways we could solve this, and that's when he reminded me that the end reward of this quest is actually a weapon called the broadsider, and it's a small cannon you can hold that shoots small cannonballs. With that reminder that was in the game, I was able to easily set up these cannons to fire down the whole line of them when you pull the circuit breaker here. Then after a short cooldown, you can use it again. And then Ferret went in and added in an optional objective to the attacks that would remind the player that these cannons are available for use after their cooldown. So you have helped Ironsides repair the ship. You've dealt with the scavengers. He sends you over to flip one last.
It was
circuit breaker
marketed
from
as
vantage point,
GTA but
and
RPG.
you
Huh.
pull the circuit breaker,
Interesting.
powers up the engines, and then the player.
Oh, they
gets
did
the-
market it as you can do anything?
This is just
Okay,
to
that's
give visual
interesting.
audio. But the rear engines kick in by themselves at first and kind of drags the ship off of the bank. And just before it falls into the water, the front engines kick in and keep it afloat. And if you were wondering, you can actually jump across the buildings to my left and actually
Oh,
ride it,
no.
ride it over to where it ends.
Oh no,
We
chat!
had to put a kill trigger in. The
Not
logic kicked
today
off
of
the player
all
was when we
days.
had to end it, but-
Oh wait, it's
So,
the 10th.
Ferret and I's
Never mind.
Collaboration didn't end
There's
there.
nothing
We
wrong
now
with
have
that
a
imagery
World
then.
War I ship in the Boston skyline at the top of one of the skyscrapers. You can see it now from everywhere on the map. We're trying to figure out how to get the player up there and the least amount of changes to the game. And I ended up pitching this idea and kind of going with an elevator that takes you from the bottom floor to the top. And it's some empty rooms up there, and you can explore a little bit of them and loot some stuff. After the state change of the crash, that same elevator just drops you out onto the wreck. And then Ferret went in, added some post-quest dialogue to the crew robots, as well as Captain Ironsides, where Captain Ironsides doubles down on the fact that this mission has been a success, and by his calculations, in a mere century, will take to the seas. So it really benefits you to kind of learn or develop a shared language with the people you're collaborating with, especially if they're in other departments. It'll really benefit kind of the efficiency you hook up your content and kind of the options you have once you start pushing on it and putting it in different directions.
So after Fallout 4, Darrell and I get tapped to lead a DLC, and so now we are not only making content, but we have to plan and review content as well. So this ended up being Fallout 4 Far Harbor, and during the planning phase of Far Harbor, we had a very concise, clear set of goals. One of the big ones was we knew we wanted multiple endings. The base game of Fallout 4 had been out for a while when we were planning this DLC, and
This is beloved. This is the best thing Bethesda has done in years,
the
allegedly.
big major points of feedback we got from both the press and our audience was they wanted more choices and consequences, a lot of that crunchy RPG story stuff. So we knew we wanted multiple
Okay, but that's
endings.
also really interesting because the dialogue system really does not make for good sort of dialogue choices or branching because you only have the 4 choices at any time. So that's a real constraint on how you can tell the story. So how do you solve that? Well,
Also knew we wanted to add more non-combat gameplay and solutions to quest content. We also knew that people were probably going to play this DLC after they had finished the base game, so we had to have high-level equipment added. And then we also wanted to continue the success we had in Skyrim and Fallout 4 by allowing the development team to experiment more during the DLC. One of those experimentations was we had 3 factions, and we gave ownership to the story
Spoilers.
for each faction to an individual quest designer each, so a different quest designer owned each faction. And one of the major things we did was give them more say over both the story, but also all the outcomes. When we were planning the DLC originally, I only planned for about 3 outcomes for the ending. And by the time the quest designers finished up Far Harbor, they had added about a dozen to 15 endings, depending on which variations you count. Some of them were pretty small, but they were able to take choice consequences and reactivity a lot further than I thought was possible. We also added in more of those stat challenges that we had originally put in for the USS Constitution quest, so we added those everywhere. We also added in an entire new puzzle gameplay system. This was inspired by 90s, early 2000s virtual reality movies and sequences, so a lot of bright colors. And the basic idea here was we needed to tap into and retrieve memories from an android, but we were able to complete an entire tower defense system within Fallout 4 in a matter of months by the end of the DLC. Another thing that happened was we had artists who wanted to experiment with
1 second. Cat wants to come inside. Hey, Cat, do you want to say hello to stream? Want to say hello? You want to make noise? Screw you. Sorry about that. I feel like Dark Souls is a pretty good RPG style horror game, but I would like to see a first person RPG horror game that's not as slow like Resident Evil or Amnesia. Yeah. Like, I don't know. Could be cool. Could be cool. I think Mikkela's plan of total control was always in our face in the main game. Unallied gold means pure order after all, and with all the other colors running around, that wasn't happening. Cat! Why you gotta scratch up my couch, man? It's weird because this is what New Vegas does, so I wonder why they deviated so much in base 4. I think they deviated so much in the base game because they had really just poor priorities. I think the voiced protagonist was a stupid decision. I thought it was a stupid decision on day 1. And I remember watching people gradually come to realize that, yeah, you know, having to create so many more dialogue choices for the player character actually makes it kind of hard to design quests, because if you have to re-record all of the lines when you make changes, you can't really be making that many changes, you know. But yeah, it's also just like, it doesn't have like a creative stamp on it, you know. It doesn't feel like something, it doesn't feel like somebody's vision. It just feels like, here are the things, and we did the things. And Starfield feels like that too, where it's just, you like, what, you guys didn't take any chances. Like this work has nothing to say. Even though I think Starfield could have been cool.
With design. So one of our world artists, Nadia Hashert, wanted to write the story for the space she was working on. She pitched the story to me and Darl. We approved it. A great little tale. She wrote all the notes, but also used her art background to do illustrations to help tell the story. And another big thing we did is we wanted to continue to allow level designers to experiment with quest design. And so Dee Langlois, who I had worked with on Skyrim, was tapped to do both a large quest, a big side quest, but also a really large location that would encapsulate the quest. And this ended up being the Brain Dead side quest in Far Harbor, which takes place in a vault and is a murder mystery involving robots. So those were our plans, but we experienced a lot of setbacks as we moved to actually make the entire DLC.
So now I'm going to talk about how we went about solving some project-wide problems that came up during Far Harbor, as well as kind of things we didn't solve and what we...
4 feels like we're in a Fallout world in the most bland sense. Strange to even say that, but Far Harbor Nuka Land was enjoyable.
Realized after we had finished Far Harbor, the mistakes we had made in some cases. So first off, the 3 different faction quest lines that Will had talked about ended up requiring more elaborate battle sequences than we had originally anticipated. We ended up calling in an experienced level designer, Steve Cornett, to come in and help out. And Steve had not only set up kind of scripted sequences like this before, but as I mentioned in the atypical example before, he's worked with the quest tools, he's developed a shared language with quest designers, so he's able to implement the attack as well as explain the needed elements to hook into the quests for the various quest designers that were running the faction quests.
But yeah, this is I think this is just kind of what happens when you don't have you know, a creator in charge of the thing. You just, you know, Tim Kaine creates Fallout, then it just sort of falls out of his hands, and gradually everything that made Fallout is just sort of etched away. You know, like, look at Star Wars, where, say what you want about those prequel movies George Lucas made, but they feel like movies made by like a guy with a vision. You can like them, you can dislike them. They do kind of suck, but they're also kind of great. You know, I think that's about the best, most objective thing about them. The objective way of looking at them. But then you hand it over to Disney, and now it's just sort of like factory assembly, and there's nothing. And then you have like stuff like the first season of The Mandalorian, where you're like, oh, this is what Star Wars could be like if it had like somebody allowed to just do something with it, you know, because I think Jon Favreau probably had enough Hollywood juice that he could just tell the staff at LucasArts to screw off and, you know, just don't try to mess with my story. I'm just going to do this myself. And then it turns out pretty good. But then, you know, those fingers just sort of get probed into the work, and all of the unique things just get washed away because you get bureaucracy. Ugh. Elden Ring movie by Disney? Yeah, it's gonna be ugh. Yeah, you could show what he wanted to showcase, the spiral of Anakin into Vader, and yeah, like I've had this conversation so many times, probably on stream even. But the prequels tell, like, the story, not the writing, not the dialogue, just the story. That's a really good story. Like, of this kid, slave, he's freed, becomes a Jedi, and then a war breaks out, and he realizes that the dogma of his monk cult that he lives under is completely out of whack with reality. He realizes that the Jedi, they sort of live to be better than everybody else because like they're not a part of humanity. Like they're not allowed to have children, and it's like, but where's the next generation of Jedi gonna come from? You guys just gonna go and steal more kids? It's like, you live outside of life while also having this. It's really easy for you to it's probably really easy to have this sort of puritanical dogma of Jediism when you don't actually have to interact with the rest of the world. And during the war, he realizes that the Jedi Code is not up to snuff, and that actually, you need a broader perspective of things. But also, like, he loses faith in democracy, and like the political institutions are all corrupted, and then, it's just like, it's a really good way of telling this. Like, it is a good story, it's just ultimately maybe not told so great. It's a better story than the original trilogy. I tell you what. It's not better told, but it is a better story.
Kind of across the finish line in time. Also, the puzzles that
Star Wars needs more guns.
Along with one of our senior systems designer, Kurt Coleman, who worked on a lot of the workshop elements in Fallout 4. He and I worked on all of the puzzles.
Without a vision, art just turns into a commodity. Yeah, and emotions just turn into a vibe. Yeah, and so many of these games, like Fallout 4, it doesn't feel like this was made because somebody had something to say. It feels like it was made because, we have quarterly earnings and we have to justify having these people on staff, so let's do something with it,
And the issues we ended up having with these were that puzzles could confuse the players at times, but ultimately overstay their welcome for most players. And the biggest issue was that we had made 5 puzzles, and the first 3 are mandatory, and the last one optional.
What is Todd Howard interested in? Todd Howard is, I'm told he's the creative lead over at Bethesda. What is he even interested in? I've played a lot of his games. I don't know. Like, I know what Kojima is interested in. I know what Fumito Ueda is interested in, and what Hidetaka Miyazaki. Like, I understand, like, or Shinji Mikami. I know what they think about. I know what they're fascinated by. I know, like, what things in life perplex them, and what they like. I know what they're thinking about. Todd Howard, I'm like, I don't know, like, he likes to rebuild America. Like, that's a theme that's cropped up in, I think, 3 of his games. But, like, it's really sort of uncommitted and
I took full
bland,
advantage of the
I
optional
think.
puzzles by using all of the gameplay elements to make it kind of as fun and challenging as I could. I'd been playing a lot of Portal 2 at the time and making a lot of Portal maps. That's also probably why a lot of this is in here. But the issue with the player is they would end up going into the first memory sequence, and after the 3rd memory sequence, we'd pop an objective for them to come out to the main land out of the virtual reality area, but we continue to pop objectives for the remaining memory sequences, and most players assumed they had to complete all 5 of them before they even left the memory sequence, and I believe most players played all of them. Also, our large location and large quest that was taken on by a solo level designer, D. Langlois, ended up being too much for one person to take on the way we had scoped it. We had kind of done what we had done on previous projects when a level designer took on, a location and a quest, or just a lot from another silo, like quest design. They just buffer some more time. And this time we did it again and just buffered more time. And we realized we actually needed to properly scope these, get buy-in from both quest and level production to actually get these completed properly. This ended up requiring us to have D focus on the quest elements to get those finished up, while we brought in outside level designer help to finish up the location elements. The end results of Far Harbor after we had shipped were that Will and I got to work together and lead a project, which was really awesome. The criticism on Far Harbor was mostly positive, which was really satisfying to hear and kind of read on the internet and places and hear from people, really. Our biggest sore spot were the puzzles and us not properly telegraphing to the player which ones were kind of mandatory, which were optional. And our level design quests that we took on for this project needed more production buy-in from both sides to be properly scoped, but in the end, our team morale was really high and we were excited about whatever our next project was going to be.
Cool.
The next thing I'm going to talk about is what happens to our collaboration and the way we work when the work starts to get really difficult. So we're moving forward to Fallout 76 now, and the 2 things to keep in mind are we're scaling up internally, as well as working with external studios more than we had ever done before, as well as taking on a multiplayer project, which we also had never done before. And the first thing I want to cover is the easy stuff. And what I mean by that is the stuff that was at least as fast to iterate on or as fast to kind of get the content into the game as it was in previous projects.
I still want them to release the Fallout 76 map. Just let me pay you like $40 or something, and let me just walk around that map. I don't want to do any of the online stuff. I don't want to do the monthly subscription stuff. I just want to explore the areas,
Compared to previous projects. So during Fallout 76, we were able to do basic level design almost as fast as we had done it during previous Bethesda projects. We were able to build out our worlds up to the level you kind of can see here. We could add in encounters. We could do all kinds of the things we needed to do on previous projects, kind of flesh our locations out. But the biggest hurdle comes in when we need to deal with a multiplayer element. If we want to play our level with another player or play through our location with a quest enabled, that would require the server to be spun up to support all of this. And our iteration time, typically at Bethesda during non-multiplayer projects, is about a minute to kind of see your changes in game, which is pretty fast, and we came to rely on that. We could also push changes to the game that was already running, so we could do some changes almost instantaneously. Once we had to deal with a server, we ended up dealing with kind of iteration times that could go anywhere from 3 minutes up to 10 minutes on a bad day if the server's having issues that day. But basic level design, we could still build out the world and stuff without having to rely too much on the server spinning up, which really benefited us in the long run. As far as building out the world, there was other caveats to that I'll bring out later. We also got to start with Fallout 4 assets from the beginning. This was a luxury we'd never been able to use before, other than going from a project into DLC where you can just hit the ground running and work right away. So we were able to do that on Fallout 76. And that really helped us, the combination of hit the ground running at the beginning as well as have the iteration time to build.
This is actually a really fun part of designing stuff is when you just have a kit, you just decorate the room or you just plop down houses or whatever. And then when you go over it and you have to personalize it and maybe, change up those kits, add to them, create custom pieces, it's really fun. It's really fun.
World Art was also able to iterate just about as fast as we were for the same reasons. We were able to get the world blocked out, the landscape, or kind of define where our locations were going to go, and we had all the assets to kind of block all this stuff out right away. This was really beneficial to us because the map, as we had scoped it for 76, was to be about four times the size of Fallout 4. So all these benefits of world building were really helpful to us.
I wonder if for Fallout 76, because I haven't played it, I don't know what the map layout looks like, but I would imagine that there's probably a document somewhere that is like, loot. Like, what are the activities the player performs? He loots, he explores, he fights. I don't think you talk to characters. You don't have like sort of NPCs. You build. So you have like scavenge. I guess scavenge falls under loot, but I would be like loot is consumable. Scavenging is more like crafting materials. So I would imagine that every single scene or sequence or location needs to facilitate all of those, and then you have to here's the proper way of directing this sequence. Like, this is the flow we want to go with, and so from any angle the player's going to walk into the sequence. The first thing they need to do is probably get some porcelain or find some health kits because there's a fight coming up. Then at the second layer they need to find some ammo. And maybe, you have some small enemy encounters. But then you have a big enemy encounter set piece in the center of the region. And then you have to sort of take that... And I don't know if, this is just... I'm spitballing a structure. But you have to take that structure and flesh it out in 100 different ways for 100 different locations. I think that would be really fun. I don't know if it would play really nice because it would probably begin to feel really formulaic. But I don't think that's a problem for a game like 76. It seems like sort of games as service, people it's just abnegation. You're just sort of killing time, having fun, don't think too hard about it. But figuring out ways to frame that structure within the geometry and world layout, I think that would be a really fun job.
Next thing I want to talk about is the hard stuff, and that's the opposite of the easy stuff, which is the stuff that just took longer on this project for various reasons that I'll start to explain as we go through.
Been getting into world building in Dungeons and Dragons, and it's some really enjoyable stuff, especially with telling what exactly happened in this location, why things exist. I don't know, it's so much fun. Yeah, it is really fun.
Examples. First off, the multiplayer hurdles that came up, especially for level design when it came to scripting our locations. Even if you were knowledgeable with our proprietary scripting language from previous projects, adding in the hurdles of multiplayer could really cause issues with even somebody who's used to the scripting. Knowing which events and which functions fire on the server versus the client was enough to kind of make some level designers not want to script anymore because of the added confusion and the iteration time just to test if they did anything proper anyway. Early on in Fallout 76, I decided to script up or add some scripting elements to a location that were elements that I had done before. That way the only hurdles I'd run into were the multiplayer ones. And I was also trying to figure out what a interesting multiplayer Fallout location would be, because that was a new thing for us. And I settled on this set of haunted cabins. This is Alpine River cabins. And you can come here alone, obviously, or with a group of friends, or just with random players. And you'll discover that there's haunted picture frames that spin randomly. There's doors that will slam closed every once in a while. Distant screaming. I'd spawn enemies randomly. And keen-eyed players could spot power cables that would bounce between the cabins as well as head up into the trees. And if you follow them up into the trees, you'll find a treehouse overlooking the the cabins, and all of the haunted sequences are set to be automated, so it's just firing through all of them, and players are experiencing them. You can actually turn off the terminal sequence and then affect them yourselves, so you can mess with your friends or other random players that are passing by.
That's pretty
What this ended up kind of proving out is that the difficulty and the hurdles that multiplayer added to kind of our not only our scripting and understanding that, but also our iteration time, and ended up limiting the number of unique gameplay experiences we could add to our individual locations. And that was really something we did a lot in previous projects, was just add a little more scripting to bring up the story some or make our location more memorable. This also ended up having a ripple effect of level design.
But yeah, like we talked about earlier, how in order to tell a story or to probably design quests when you have a lot of different mobility options, you probably need to have the quest be really flexible to allow the player to sort of dart in and out of it at any time, and maybe even design the quest in such a way that it wraps around the player's experience rather than try to wrap the player's experience around it. Inserting multiplayer into your game, it is like you probably just don't bother doing quests. Just don't. And I know, like, you have World of Warcraft and Elder Scrolls Online and stuff like that, but it's like, you just talk to somebody there, and then you go to a place, kill the goblin, get the loot, and then you come back. And it's just like a really simple sort of formula. That's what it seems like to me. I haven't seen World of Warcraft footage for like 18 years. I've never played it, but that's what it seemed like it was for me. So I think it's like remember when Destiny was revealed, and they always do this when they're revealing these 4-player co-op games. They always have like streamers talking to each other, and they're like, yeah, we gotta help each other. Are you gonna do 8? And they always have like these terms, and they're like taking the gameplay a bit too seriously, and it just like feels really artificial, because I don't think players super duper work well together when you have like multiplayer sequences, role playing wise.
Kind of unlearning that shared language they had developed with the Quest team because of using the Quest tools and doing scripting. Since we were doing less of that, all of the stuff that was benefited from it started to dissipate. Also, something to keep in mind that I mentioned at the beginning of the 76 section is our scale. We're kind of starting to scale up more than we ever had before, and kind of as a to set the pace here is we shipped Skyrim with a little over 100 developers, and the process we used to make this game is the one that Will and I have been kind of describing through this talk already. But as you look here, moving forward into Fallout 4, we didn't scale up that much more. We did bring in some outside help from Behavior Interactive on things like our rendering tech and some other graphics things, but our scale didn't change that much. We still ran with the same process when we developed Fallout 4. But as we move forward into 76, you can see that our scale just kind of goes to a level where we were not obviously expecting it. At this point, we are double what we were on Fallout 4, even if you include our external help. We also are adding more external help from other studios that are kind of owned by the umbrella company that owns us. And also keep in mind the blue that defines BGS devs under Fallout 76 is not actually solid. It's made up of 4 Bethesda studios. So even internally, we're trying to communicate remotely and figure out how that works.
Yikes.
And now at this level of scale, it's impossible for any one person to know everybody on the team. And it's also much more difficult than ever to know who does what, who you're supposed to report to. So that just affects process all across the board.
There's like a perfect sort of Indian ratio.
In the end,
Chief to
Fallout
Indian
76 has
ratio.
a rough launch. We end up taking
Don't want
the
too
year
many
in
people on a
human NPCs,
project.
Dialogue for those human NPCs, instance interior locations, so you can actually have quest content that can change state of the world. We end up adding all that content to the Wastelanders DLC, which ends up helping revive Fallout 76.
So moving forward, we know we have to deal with this new issue of scale, and how do we work with this incredibly large team? So let's talk about Starfield. So by the time we ship Starfield, we've grown even more, probably by about the same amount from Fallout 4 to Fallout 76.
Okay. I think I'm beginning to notice what the problem with Starfield might have been. You've quadrupled your internal staff since Skyrim. You have like a Skyrim development team's worth of outside studios working on your title. I'm beginning to see what might have gone wrong here.
As you can see here,
Jesus.
well over 500 people, but also we are now working with a large number of external groups, well over a dozen. And these groups are doing everything from effects, lighting, they're working on tools programming, systems programming, pretty much everything. And they have to all be integrated into the development team for the work they are doing. And another part of this is these are external groups, each with their own culture, each with their own leadership, and they are being brought in at various times throughout production, sometimes early on, sometimes to finish it. So life becomes a lot more focused on our task tracking software. We were using Jira at the time. Jira definitely became a way of life as we tried to reconcile and handle all of the work being done across so many people. And the process we ended up settling on was one that was departmental focused. So we had all of the approvals handled by a departmental lead who also had a departmental producer. So for example, Quest Design, there was a lead Quest designer. I was the lead Quest designer for Starfield. I had a design producer specific to Quest, and we would go through all of the requests and proposals.
This seems expensive. This seems monstrously expensive.
Another thing we had to do was also start reconciling the schedule across all areas of production. So every request now needed to go through all the producers because we needed to check all of the contingent work. Asking for something as
Oh my god, just bureaucracy upon bureaucracy.
Do you need animations for it? Do you need sound effects for it? How much does that add to the schedule? Can it not fit because one of those teams does not have the time? That all had to be wrangled, and so that became a way of life for many people. And then finally, because there's so much work going on, we needed to make sure that there was accountability for all of that work. And so we needed to create a system where all of the departmental leads were the ones providing the feedback for all the work done, and also verifying that the work was completed and saying, yes, it's finished now. So this had an inadvertent consequence of favoring the department over the actual project and what the project needed. And this makes a lot of sense because when you are first asked to be a department lead, you're worried about the department. That is the thing you're told you're responsible for. Suddenly you have to reconcile several people's schedules. You're responsible for them. You're responsible for their time and their output. And when your schedule is getting squeezed, you want to defend it and make sure your team has the time they need and is hitting things at the quality that it needs. But this can also lead to a siloing effect where every department is scrambling for their resources and saying no to collaboration requests. So before we had the problem of, hey, when we're doing these big collaborations, there's a lot of found work that we aren't scheduling properly. Now it is scheduled properly because now we know we don't have time for it. So. So another consequence of this was, as we move forward, was documentation became a way of life and became absolutely critical. We used to be able to just sit down someone new to the team with someone who had already been on the project, and they would just learn all of the things they needed to know, as kind of almost through osmosis. But now we had to rely on all of our documentation tools. So for example, we had a shared documentation tool with Confluence. We were also using Slack. We had to
this game was developed during COVID, I think, also. I can't imagine that helped.
Enforce putting communication in the major Slack groups, not only so that it could be asynchronous, but also so that everyone could see it, because we needed to make sure there were no hallway conversations.
How did no one see this coming when there's 10 different departments?
And finally, we had to do a lot more tutorials. So
well, I mean, when you have like a big bureaucracy like this, it's very hard to get it to move anywhere, but once you started moving, it's like it's a life or death thing to actually stop it, because if you stop production in order to sort of redirect the project, you're undoing maybe months of work, and that's how many ungodly millions of dollars. And every day they're not working, they're still getting paid, so you need to keep things going. And your ability to just step in on the conveyor belt, stop it, make changes, and then restart it just diminishes massively when you can't just tell everybody, hey, we all know each other, this is what we're doing now, make the proper adjustments.
I was in OBS Studio a lot making video tutorials. So in Fallout 4, when I needed to teach someone the tool set, I would just sit down with them and answer their questions. But now we were working with people from around the nation, sometimes around the globe. I often didn't know when they would need me, and I often didn't know who might need me or what they would need to know. So
this feels like I'm watching the birth of who was it that it wasn't Constantine who created the Byzantine bureaucracy. It was some emperor. I think it was after, or maybe it was Constantine. But it feels like I'm watching the birth of that, where it's hey, here we have sort of dynamic group of people working together, and now we're gonna increase the size by 6, and we'll just add this layer of complexity and
tutorials and how-tos about every feature of the toolkit. Another interesting consequence, by the way, this is not a real Slack profile. I read this from Slack's website, so no secrets here. But this is an example of a phenomenon that happened where not everyone knows you or has a relationship with you, especially if they're from one of those outside groups who's coming in to help at the end. So your title became incredibly important. There are many people I met because they messaged me because they saw my title and they were assigned to work on something maybe that day and didn't know who to speak to, so they came to me assuming, oh, you must know something about this because you have lead in your title and it's somewhat adjacent to what I think you're working on. And so you might meet someone that day who you had never met before, and you're working together simply by recognition of title instead of previous relationship or knowing each other from working on the project. So what does level and quest design collaboration look like in this environment? Game developers hate bureaucracy. We now have a ton of bureaucracy. So can you continue to make memorable moments at this sort of scale with this sort of overhead? So I'm going to have one last example of content. This is the buried temple sequence at the end of Starfield. So I was implementing the main quest in addition to leading the quest design team, and this was around the time I had done the third iteration of the main quest, so I had written and implemented the main quest about 3 times, and we were finally at a state in the project where we could play through the whole thing together. And it became very clear that we were missing a large final location that was going to tie the main story together and have a satisfying action-filled payoff. We also didn't have a big space battle at the end, and this was a space game. We added a new space battle system, so we had to have some more elaborate sequence added there as well. Now, I had a problem. I was both implementing the main quest and leading the quest design team, so I had absolutely no time. The entire quest design team was already overbooked. And so we went to a trusted senior level designer, Steve Cornett. We've talked about Steve a number of times in this talk. He was definitely our panic button multiple times. He might still be the panic button now, we're not sure. But we knew that Steve had worked on a lot of quest design since Skyrim, and so we went to Steve and said, hey, quest design is overbooked. We need someone who can pitch and implement the final quest of Starfield. And I was on hand to help write dialogue and review the content with him so that we could get a tight iteration loop because we didn't have a lot of time. And we also made sure we assigned him a separate level designer from BGS Montreal, Samuel Fronteau, handled the layout. Because as we learned previously, asking someone to do both an incredibly large space and an incredibly large quest in a small
This whole presentation has the feeling of, hey guys, we know we screwed up. Here's what went wrong.
Starfield is ultimately a story about parallel universes, and he thought we could take spaces from the main story and have you hop into them throughout the final sequence to tie everything together. We also added in a final fight with an adversary, including a way to skip the fight entirely using the speech challenge system, and Steve repeated the dimension hopping mechanic here so that you would be fighting your adversary throughout several iconic spaces from the main quest. So this was really made possible by a collaboration, a very classic collaboration between old veteran designers from Skyrim and new designers who had come in more recently. And the thing that made this work was necessity and urgency. So as teams get large, they will silo naturally. That happens. But necessity and urgency also naturally breaks silos because we knew we had to have this piece in for the main quest. Main quest is an important piece of content. It gets a priority, but we also knew we didn't have a lot of time. So trying to do everything formally wasn't going to work. We had a lot of experience with how long that bureaucracy would take, and so we know we needed to suspend things. So we moved mountains and shifted things around so that a small group of people could work on this very, very quickly. Now, you don't need to wait for an emergency in order to do this. The important thing is providing your team with a set of project-centered goals and project-centered communication, always letting people know constantly and consistently, hey, this is what the current problem with the project is. All of the departmental leads need to know that when it comes to their individual work and their individual teams, we need to all collectively sacrifice for these higher level goals so that we can hit the things we need to hit. So let's talk about some takeaways. Number one, write and design your game together. You might have an area of responsibility, but your colleagues in your other specialties have a lot to add to your work. They have other perspectives, and you do not need to be defensive or ultimately even in control of your own content. We're all along for the ride. They will make the work better.
Also, remember to develop.
I don't know about that. I mean, like, knowing how to work with somebody is really useful, but no, you should definitely fight for your vision, man.
The people you're collaborating with, especially if they're in another.
Maybe like if you're just a cog in a big machine, maybe just focus on the overall picture.
Telling abilities and allows you to push the content you do end up with in the game into fun in different directions.
Give your team clear goals and let them reach for it. Creatives really thrive in a sandbox where things are defined, but there's a lot of room to play and experiment. This will allow them to achieve things and surprise you in ways you didn't think were possible.
And also remember that when the work gets difficult, people will tend to do what is most comfortable to them, and oftentimes that's retreating back into their specialties. This will end up having a negative effect on any shared language that has been developed, and it will also end up focusing the content of your game on the stuff that's easier to do. So make sure that if you want certain content in your game, make sure it's not super difficult to implement or you won't get as much as you want of it.
And finally, large teams will naturally silo, and emergencies will naturally break them out of it, but you do not need to wait for an emergency. Clear, consistent,
Hi, where have I been? Gangrider, I've been
focused on what they need to focus on,
busy.
and everyone
I've been
will do what's
recording
necessary to make sure that the project
Elden
succeeds over
Ring.
their department or their individual teams. So we want to take a moment here to thank all of the collaborators we've named in this talk, and also all of the collaborators we didn't name.
What if we
It takes a
made
lot
snails in
to
space?
So thank you for
No.
everyone who has worked
Snails
on
don't into
on various
space.
titles over the years. And we want to give a special mention to Ferret Bodewin. As Darrell said, we lost Ferret during the production of Starfield. We had known him for over a decade.
Ferret.
He was a very fiercely optimistic person, probably the most optimistic person we'd ever worked with. He brought a lot of joy, both to the content he made and to the team. So thank you so much, Ferret. Thank you all for coming. Please line up for questions. Remember to fill out your evaluations. This is our social media handles if you want to talk to us later. Thank you so much.
Hi, great talk. Thank you for being so diligent about crediting people and your collaborators. My question is, you mentioned a shared language multiple times throughout the talk. And I think that probably looks differently depending on the different teams and the different studios that those teams are working at. I was wondering if you could give us any examples of like specific terms or specific progressions of that shared language, like, oh, when we figured out how to have this shared term that really helped us in this way, something like that.
Okay, yeah, so specific examples of shared language. So I don't know, I can't even remember when we developed certain terms, but like, for example, at Bethesda Game Studios, we had terms like trigger box and essential NPC.
Yeah,
and
whatever the checkbox got named redundantly.
Yeah, so when we were working together, there's a lot of, like, for example, so trigger volumes where you need to know whether something is within this space or the player has entered this space. We just called them trigger boxes. And so I would just be like, hey, Darl, I threw down a trigger box. It's called MQ101 stage 50. Don't move it.
Yeah. And we talk about aliases a lot. That's a big part of quests. So we'd come up with like what they can and can't do, and an alias is just a pointer to something in the game world that the quest can hold on to and refer to even if it's not loaded. But it's all little goofy things like that, which can either come from your studio having proper documentation so the language stays alive, or the way it happened at Bethesda, it was like you sit down and learn how to use the tool or learn from someone else, and then the shared language will just kind of develop. It's not specifically terms, it's just an understanding of maybe what I take out of shared language.
Yeah, definitely.
Are we back? I was briefly offline there.
Hi. First, I just wanted to thank you both for these games and your work. Like, I genuinely, these games and quests and levels like raised me and it taught me, like, it made me who I am in terms of like quest design, like in game development, and just as a person in general. Like, and I really appreciate it.
I hate this. I hate when people do this, where they're like, I'm gonna waste everybody's time to talk about me. Oh, thank you so much. Your game really inspired me. It helped me develop who I am. Like, man, there's people lining up to ask questions. Get it out.
And coming from that, I'm very curious, like, because you've worked at this studio for a long time, like, and you've left now, and I'm just curious, like, with this large amount of scale and this huge growth in the team that seems to have created a lot of stress, like, and a lot of like difficulty to manage, like, what do you think that like?
Why is nobody in the crowd being like, hey, is this why Starfield kind of sucked? Did you guys just not have time to do a good game because you were too busy developing stuff?
Large team inherently creates this, or is it like the scope of the game from the beginning? I'm just curious of what could have been avoided or what could be improved. Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So, do large teams inevitably create bureaucracy and stress? And could this be a solve of scaling? So, scale and team size are kind of the same thing, especially nowadays. So, the bigger your game, the more people you need. I don't know if scale is necessarily the enemy of agility, but I do think that when teams get larger, there are certain natural things that happen. One of them I mentioned is siloing, but another one is, so there's a neurological theory called Dunbar's number. That's how many social connections that you can support in your brain. And
150.
It's theorized to be about 150. So once you pass 150, it's impossible to hold everyone in your head and have a connection with everyone on the team. So you need to start kind of splitting things off. And I think if you're very aggressive about chunking up the team so that it doesn't get above that size, you can have individual sub-teams within a larger project that can then have a collaborative sort of natural relationship. Or another thing you could do is just be very aggressive about titles, formalization, and communication structure. It's the boring part of game development, but it's like flossing or eating your vegetables, especially when you have a lot of people. That's what you have to do.
Makes a lot of sense. Thank you very much.
Ew.
Hello. Just to echo what the last question asker just said, thank you for these games. They're awesome. Great talk. That was a lot of fun and a great trajectory through your entire history of games. My question is simple. A big part of the talk is basically cross-department collaboration, allowing people to do something that isn't their regular job. But something that I personally struggle with is when you get a ton of ideas or feedback or whatever from other departments that is maybe unwelcome or just isn't going to fit or whatever. How do you deal with getting ideas from a bunch of people who want to collaborate and want to contribute, but that can't make it in for whatever reason?
Oh yeah. So how do you deal with there's more feedback than time?
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know. It's more like if you're the level designer, you're ultimately responsible.
My question is simple. I mean, the answer is simple. You just be like, no, I can't collaborate on that.
And it would assume all of the feedback you're getting is just suggestions, unless it's from somebody who's in charge of the stuff you're doing. That's what it is. So it's like, it can be hard. You can't incorporate it all, and they either have to know that or never learn it. I don't know.
Yeah. That's why it's so important to say who is ultimately responsible. You need to be able to say, okay, at the end of the day, you're going to have subjective calls that you have to make, and you need to know who's going to make that call. So for the level designer needs to make the final call when it comes to anything that affects the layout and the encounters in the space. The quest designer needs to make the final call on the narrative, story, and characters. That's just the way that we had divided up those responsibilities, but it's important to set those boundaries early.
Awesome, thank you.
Hey, thank you guys for the talk. My question kind of prongs two ways, but might end up being the same answer. I was surprised from your examples at how disjointed it seemed that quest and level design were, in terms of like the level designers were working on the level independent of what it was actually going to be in the quest, and it seemed to come together later on in development. So my first question is typically when did your guys' teams collaborate in the design process? And other than, I imagine, it should be at the beginning of the design. When should these teams collaborate?
Yeah, when should the teams collaborate? You feel like it felt like we were working independently and then came together. And that was, in our experience, there were different levels of that. So sometimes it was, hey, I came up with a quest. I need a space for it. Your space looks cool. I'm going to take it. And then we would start working together. But sometimes you would be put together from the beginning. A lot of the major storylines, for example, because they were so big and we knew they would take up a lot of art bandwidth and other resource bandwidth, we would put people together from the beginning. And so those spaces tended to have a lot more at the start. But that was part of what was great about the agility of like Skyrim and Fallout 4 was I could just come in and add stuff to a space Darrell was working on, and it would only take us maybe a couple of conversations to hammer it all out.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, thanks for the really great games over the years. You said something earlier that kind of prompted a question in my mind, and you mentioned that the quest designers were typically responsible for the combat NPCs, sorry, the other way around. The level designers were typically responsible for the combat NPCs, and the quest designers were responsible for non-combat. But I'm curious how that worked in games like Skyrim or Fallout 4, where those lines got very fuzzy a lot of the time because the player could fight anyone at any time, and especially farther back in Bethesda's history you go, the more of that there is. And yeah, I'm just curious how you decided who kind of got to make calls on things like that, where you had NPCs that could, at any minute in these systems, kind of shift between those two dimensions.
Yeah, so how do you deal with having particular responsibilities when it's an open world and chaos can erupt at any time?
I think it ends up depending on like what the purpose of the NPC actually is. Like in a town, you can fight with anything.
Okay, so this is why I think our good friend Josh Sawyer is probably just a better designer than these guys, because he talked about in the New Vegas narrative design discussion he had, he talked about how every player encounter you design has to be conceptualized as the player having a kill everything orb around them, because at any moment they can just bring out a gun and kill everybody. So how are you gonna come for that? And the way Bethesda solves for that is just by making certain characters unkillable, and it's pathetic. And it's a great showcase of like what we talked about earlier, where you have to just sort of restrain the player's expression in a very limited area, just because the game doesn't play if they're allowed to do the things they want to do. But if you don't want me to be able to kill, if I'm not allowed to kill this guy, maybe don't give me the opportunity to kill him in the first place, you know?
It's more about if the location and the NPCs that are there were set up.
Also, everybody's thanking them. It's like, oh, thank you so much. But I would be like, they made Starfield. That voids all the things.
To be a combat encounter already. There can be cases where like there can be important quest dialogue on a boss you're going to kill. We have to converse about that and decide like, okay, before he dies, he's got to get this dialogue out. Like there's some back and forth when it comes to like little detailed stuff, but typically I think it's a shared language thing where we just understand this is a combat NPC, this is a quest NPC, and that's the line. But there's probably like
that's a very different way of conceptualizing this thing.
Rules there that we're not explaining about how we define those.
Hi, yes, thank both of you for your beautiful games and a really insightful presentation. I was wondering if you could speak a little bit to the philosophy behind having quest designers handle the more kind of traditional narrative elements, as well as like scripting and other quest design elements that are seen more across lots of different studios. I'm just curious, what are your thoughts on that philosophy, and do you see that as the kind of the future as well of Bethesda game studios?
Oh, interesting. Yeah. So
I think for Fallout it'd be very fitting for the player to have an implant that forces them to be passive to certain NPCs, and you can eventually break that limitation by X thing happening. Yeah, like there's ways of framing it, but I think like it's probably better if they frame it than not, but even better is to just design the quest in such a way that it can adapt to the player doing those sorts of things.
So why does Bethesda Game Studios have the quest department handle both narrative and quest scripting? A lot of that was just
you got a random bra commercial.
All these processes started way back in like Morrowind, and so that was a much smaller team then, and you just wore a lot of hats. Like quest design also did systems design for a long time, and the level design department, I believe that was really formalized end of Oblivion Skyrim-ish,
it was,
or Fallout 3-ish.
Start of Fallout 3 was like a level design team that was making stuff in that.
Yeah, and so the specialization occurred over time, and there was a level design department, and then eventually there was a systems design department. So I think the thing is there's no standardization in the games industry. We all do it the way we need to, and the teams vary so much in size that depending on where you're at, you could wear different hats. So I think it just evolved very naturally.
Thank you.
Oh, all right, well, it's time for us to wrap up. We will go to the wrap-up session. Please follow folks if you want to head there, but otherwise, thank you so much. Fill out the evaluation forms. It helps at the conference, so thank you.
This wasn't nearly as interesting a talk as I was hoping it would be. I thought they would talk more about the actual sort of nuts and bolts of level design and quest design, and how the disciplines entwine and how they differ, and how you have to sometimes compromise and juggle different hats and such. But it's more just like internal bureaucracy and stuff. It's still like interesting to see what was going on behind the scenes and everything. But you know, a modular kit conversation this was not. Okay, so GDC apology edition. Lol. So yeah, that's hey, they can't all be winners, chat. I don't know. Do we have anything more to say about this? I'm fired. Oh man, that sucks, man. You know, one way I would love to design a level, say it's for like a Deus Ex or a Dishonored kind of immersive sim stealth action game. One way I would be interested in designing it is you have one level designer, and all he's doing is creating like here's the objective, here's like some side objectives, and that's it. He plops enemies down, and you know, he just creates like a rough skeleton of the area, just like the geometry of the place and like houses and such. And then the next level designer, he picks it up, and his specialty is combat encounters, and his job is to make the combat encounters interesting. So he just like twists the spaces a little bit and like fleshes it out a little bit, you know, moves things around, changes it up to make it accommodate combat better. Then you have the stealth level designer, and he goes in there and he creates little vents and, you know, little nooks and crannies you can hide in and such, and he moves the environment around again. And then you would get like maybe a fourth guy who's like just to sort of, you would probably just play test the level a bunch, and then you would have like a final pass through of the level done by like maybe the original guy again. Even I don't know if that's the most economic way of designing a level. It's probably better to have all of that mapped out before you actually start drawing polygons on screen, but I think it would be interesting. To see how a level evolves. Knuckle cracking, yeah. False advertising. When is the next video coming? Soon. I mean, it's ready. I mean, I haven't published it. It's the Ratchet and Clank Crate video. But now that I've finally finished recording Elden Ring, I just need to wait for the Handbrake files to render, and then I can start using that footage, and then I'll hopefully get some assembly line production of videos up and running, because it's been way too long of a dry spell. You know, I don't like having these many months go by without videos. But you know, soon, maybe just like this weekend or next week or something. I don't know. I think you've gone into this, but what are your favorite levels in video games? I really like any level that takes place on like a cliff. So like the Valley of Drakes in Dark Souls, for example, I love that. I like when levels have like dynamism to them. So there's some like New Londo, for example, because you can like elevate and lower the water. Well, you can't elevate the water level. You can lower the water level. I think that's interesting. I like levels that have like aura. I like urban environments a lot too. I made a video about that. It's really interesting because urban environments allow you to do more unnatural geometric shapes, and those shapes might be really good for navigating around, but might not look realistic in like a jungle. But in a city, you can actually, or in an urban environment, you can actually use those. I don't know. I really like moody atmospheric levels. So like, even though they're really basic, I like the levels in Amnesia: The Dark Descent, just because, you know, it's really heavy atmospheric stuff, or in a Silent Hill, for example. But I also like quiet. I don't love a level that's full of enemies. I like a level that has like, you know, just like maybe a piano is playing, and then when you walk towards the piano, it stops playing, and was it a ghost all along? Oh my god. Specialized crafters. You have giant sounding knuckles. Oh wait, maybe I was just like creaking my chair or something. How about a video about the Sakurai clips? Could you link me those on Discord? I don't know which ones you're talking about. Starfield is literally a downgrade from Skyrim. Yeah, so do we want to talk a bit about Starfield? Let's do a little Starfield conversation. I probably am never going to get another opportunity to do that. I was always sort of hesitantly, like, you know, when Starfield was coming, you can listen to the Essays and Espresso podcast. I was always like, well, you never know, you know, it could be interesting, it could be good. I didn't think it would be, but, you know, I held out hope. One thing I did not expect was for it to be so creatively bland, because you read like the 3-body problem, and there's a sequence there, spoiler alert, where it's not like a massive spoiler, don't worry. There's a sequence where the Trisolarans, they unfold an atom's 3 dimensions so that it becomes a 2-dimensional atom, and it becomes so large, it's just like this massive 2-dimensional sheet that just sort of wraps around their society that they need to remove. I you know, that sort of science fiction, where it's like, this is framed within real science, but it's just, you know, it's just wacky utilizations of real science. That would be interesting, where you go into a new star system in Starfield, and there's just a 2-dimensional sheet covering half of the star system because some society there 1 billion years ago unfolded a bunch of atoms. Or, you know, you have like the Schwarzschild equation. You can take real sci-fi concepts, not even like actual hard sci-fi, and just go wild with it. So when Starfield came out and it was like, well, you get dragon shouting powers because it's like Skyrim, I was like, this is stupid. This is remarkably stupid. Why is this a thing? So that was something I wasn't expecting, because my hope was that at least it's gonna be interesting, and I don't think it was really. Wet Dry Town, Super Mario 64. Yeah, I love that. I love that place. Knuckles the Icelander. Sakura's just his YouTube channel. Yeah, okay. I don't know. I've never watched those. Maybe I should. You have good exploration in Skyrim. The quests are shit. Yeah, pretty much. Very professional. Thank you. Was that an advertisement for the Aesir and Espresso podcast? It was. Empty area, Charo's hidden grave. You find it. I found it. I've found all the places, all the ones. Charo's hidden grave isn't that empty though. You have like a ghost bird. You have a furnace golem. You have a hippo. Bio fantasy science. It's not even like fantasy that much. It's because it's kind of like, you know, you take like a movie like The Martian, where it's like, this is just real science. You know, this is just like, obviously it's really convenient, but you know, reasonably, yeah, this could happen. But then you just extrapolate that towards like really, really high concept science, theoretical science, and you just like make that into a game. But instead, it's just like, this is just a boring, you know, it looks like NASA, which like I'm okay with that. It's like a cool sort of NASA punk kind of game. But then it's like, just like creatively, I wasn't feeling it. I have a bachelor's degree in physics, and I didn't understand that. Oh no. 3-body problem is the Mr. Beast of Chinese books. Lol. How you're knocking me for liking a popular thing. Walking stim. You should check one out right now. No, I'm not gonna watch anything more right now. I'm just about to close the stream down. Maybe your bachelor's degree in physics isn't worth my vague recollections of what happened in the 3-body problem. You should go back to school, kid. No, but you know what I mean about that, like, where there's been a lot of interesting theoretical physics thingamajigs that show up in documentaries where they're talking about like, oh, the universe has a heartbeat, and you can tap into the heartbeat, and then you can listen to the universe. It's like, obviously that's a nonsense concept I just came up with, but there are interesting things you could explore, but then instead they just were like, well, what if we had like a bandit crew, and they're like the Red Dawn or whatever they were called, and then you had like another faction, and they're like the Galactic Federation, and they're like galactic cop good guys, and you're watching this like, hey man, this is ass. This is such ass, man. This is this is everything. I've seen this so many times before. You know, it would be cool in Starfield if they'd have done this. It would be really hard to actually do, but it would have been really cool. Is if the game is ending, and they drop the bombshell revelation that actually it's not space flight. You're just hopping between dimensions, and then they canonize all of your different save files, and they're like, these are entry points into different dimensions. And after that revelation has been made, you can go back to one of those dimensions and then jump back to like the ending of the other dimension, but it like without breaking the continuity. And so now you're just like this time master galaxy hopping god, basically. It would be hard to actually do something like that, but that would have been cool. You have the boat guy, but for some reason he's a giant troll and summons a royal revenant. That royal revenant was no match for my double twin wielding jump attacks. Oh, you studied optics and geophysical astrophysics, not the three-body problem. Yeah, see, that's your problem. You were studying actual physics and not a book. About Chinese sci-fi, you can try Legendary Mechanic. It's a soft science fantasy, but the stuff there is really cool. That could be. I'm not big into sci-fi, actually, you know, even though I just went on this whole spiel. I much more prefer fantasy. I like Elden Ring. I like Lord of the Ring. Legendary Mechanic, let me see. I like a Zelda, Majora's Mask. Han Zhao, who is reincarnated into a game world called Galaxy. He chooses Mechanic, cultivate skill. Alright, could be cool. Forget that movie. That is where the guy's living in a TV show, but that concept for Starfield? Huh? Oh, the Truman Show? Red Dawn from Star Wars Outlaws? I think that's Crimson Dawn. Red Dawn is a John Milianis movie. But they were called something like that. They were called like the Red Guards, or like the Red Pirates, or some crap. Or you could do like, you know, Futurama is actually really good at this. The latest season of Futurama, it wasn't great, but it was like, it had a couple of good episodes. And one of them had them like realize the world is a simulation, and they were like doing simulations in the simulations, and they were like jumping between the simulations. Like crazy concepts like that. Why isn't Starfield doing that? Why is Starfield about like some intergalactic nerds and a guy who just like eats from garbage cans? Red-handed bandits. That's probably them. Or like that Futurama episode where they had a machine that could stop time, or like reverse it for like 10 seconds or something. Like that could be a cool gadget in the game. And then you like actually just have to facilitate that gadget being in the game. And like actually, you know, if every object in the game could track its location by 10 seconds, then this would actually be a feasible, like you'd have to play test it. It's not so easy, I know that, but like that's an interesting thing you could do with the game. And instead we just have like Skyrim, but it's NASA. It's not cool. Eating garbage. I'm assuming you can loot garbage cans in Starfield. No sewer mutants. No, Wiki. I love sewer mutants. Put sewer mutants in my Starfield. We have to have some villains, you know. Sounds like No Man's Sky. Was there any gimmick worlds like that in Starfield? I don't know. I only watched I'm gonna be honest. I only watched a Let's Play of it because I love the Let's Player, but I couldn't be I couldn't be parted with my money. I couldn't give Todd Howard another red cent from my pocket. I couldn't do it. But I'm still excited to see what they do next. What I really want is for them to figure out a production pipeline that works for them. Like From Software, they release like very highly regarded, very well made games once a year, once every 2 years. Because what happens is Miyazaki gets in there, day one, he's like with the team, they design the game. He writes the story or whatever. Then he picks a director and then he gives him the game. And then they have like a few teams working together there. But with Bethesda, it feels like it's always the Todd Howard show. And maybe Todd Howard should just be in there during like the conceptual stages and during like the first few months of development before handing the reins of development over to this guy. And then they like he along with his team, they create the game. But they do it very sort of basic. You know, you don't do full level design even. You just do basic geometric shapes and then you have like some concept art attached to it and it's like, well, this is what it's going to look like. They play test the quests and such, do like the balancing and all that, do the enemy AIs. And then, after they've done that, they hand all of that stuff off to the next team and they just build the world. They model everything and they animate everything and they make it actually look good. Like, I don't know. Who am I to tell a billion-dollar company how to run their studio? Except this company used to be able to release games fairly consistently, and now they can't anymore. So maybe they don't know what they're doing. They didn't even have Omicron Persei 8 aliens. That's true. Omicron Persei 8. That's right. Lure and Inda. It's a parallel world story. The game is the game is entry point into the false universe that was created to not die from the end of the universe. The one playing the games are from the latest live. That's interesting. That's interesting. How cool would a trash compactor world be, where like the universe's trash goes there, and outside the planet you see like a pipeline outside of it, and you can destroy it or even set the lever to maximum? That could be cool. Literally starting to destroy other planets around them. Todd Howard is as toxic as Randy Pitchford. Oh, Borderlands 4 was announced. I don't know if Todd Howard is as toxic. Like, Randy is just like an idiot. Like, aside from being a bad manager, Randy Pitchford is a moron. He doesn't know anything. Todd Howard is not a moron. He is really smart. And you can get a sense for that when he's like talking to Alex Friedman, or when he did a video with Ted Price where they were just discussing design. Todd Howard is not a moron. He is intelligent. I think he's probably in over his head. It might be that he's just not supposed to be in charge of this many people, which is why maybe he should just be, maybe he works better when he has like a team of 20 core people during the initial stage, and then he can just move on instead of being locked to projects for 8 years. But I don't know. I don't get the sense that Todd Howard is like a Randy Pitchford-esque idiot. Talk about Gearbox though. When are we gonna get another Duke Nukem game? I feel like Duke Nukem is such a woefully underutilized IP, and people go, well, you know, would this character fly today? You know, could you do this in this environment? And I'm like, yeah, you could do it. You just have to do it well. Because like, give Duke Nukem like the Wolfenstein or the Doom treatment, when you're like, we'll just make really good games with this guy, and we'll just write stories that are really interesting, and then they'll be pretty good, you know? I don't know. That Borderlands 4 panel was something. Didn't even play the game. You're making all these grandiose claims about Bethesda and Todd. I watched the Let's Play of the game. Also, I'm not saying Todd Howard is. I'm not saying. I'm not. Trying to walk carefully without having to pull back my words. I'm not saying Todd Howard is like the greatest designer of all time. I'm saying I've watched Randy Pitchford in videos. I've watched Todd Howard in videos. Randy Pitchford, he comes across as a moron. Todd Howard doesn't. Okay, that's all I'm saying. And I'm also saying, like, maybe, like, I don't know. If I'm wrong, I'm wrong. You know, it is what it is. Starfield is genuinely Bethesda's best game since Skyrim. Give it a chance. I watched a completed Let's Play. It was like 20 hours long. There is nothing of that game that appeals to me. I'm sorry. Maybe I'd like it more if I actually played it, but I don't know. I'm not. It's just like. It just, you know, if it wasn't such a big game, maybe. But I don't think you can just be the best game they've made since Skyrim. You know, okay, what? So it's better than Fallout 4? Also, I didn't really love Skyrim, so. But you know, if you liked Skyrim, that's pretty cool. If you like Starfield, I should say, that's pretty cool. And I mean that. I'm not trying to take away anybody's enjoyment of this thing. It didn't appeal to me, that's all. People make anything as raunchy as they want nowadays. It's gross. What? Lord of the Rings, Two Towers was the best game. That actually was a really good game. Everybody always talks about the Return of the King game that came out like the next year as like the great Lord of the Rings game. But I think the Two Towers tie-in game, I think that one was probably better. I played both of them, and from memory, the Two Towers one was better. Skyrim had too many. The little heart emoji is blocking the rest of that word, but I think it's missions for the devils. Yeah, missions for the devils, not enough for the good guys. Yeah. Also, maybe this isn't super accurate. It's been a while since I played Skyrim, but I feel like Skyrim was also one of those games where. Never mind. I completely lost interest in Starfield when I saw that pretty much every NPC was essential. Ooh. Two Towers was so much better. Yeah, and then you could unlock Isildur. That's pretty cool. Top 100 movies versus top 100 games. Mission Impossible. Ooh, probably the top 100 movies are better than the top 100 games, because there's only been like 10 good games. Ratchet & Clank, Ratchet & Clank 2, Majora's Mask, the Ocarina of Time, Crash Bandicoot, and Crash Bandicoot 2, the Return of Cortex or whatever. Crash to Insanity, that was pretty good. Ratchet & Clank 3. And 2 of the Jack games. Smash Bros. Melee. Ooh, I don't know about that. I didn't have a. I had a Game Boy, but I didn't have like a Nintendo machine when I was a kid, so I never got into the Smash games. Starfield. Oh yeah, and of course Starfield, the 10th. Don't forget Deadlock. Ooh. Well, this is the top 10 games of all time. Deadlock doesn't make it into that. Also, I'm assuming like Randy Pitchford, he's the Gearbox guy, right? Because I just slandered a man, and I'm reasonably certain that's the guy I'm talking about. But in case it's not, I retract everything I said. I'm talking about the idiot at Gearbox who was in that video talking like during the filming of the movie. He made that painful video. I think that's Randy Pitchford. I'm just like, just want to make sure. No, I don't hate Deadlock. I like Deadlock. It's a weird sort of detour in the series, And I also think that, I appreciate it for what it is, but I would have preferred, I would have preferred another conventional PlayStation 2 Ratchet game, because they stopped making them after that. Skyrim was influenced by also because, Ratchet & Clank 3 was so compromised because it had to juggle the multiplayer stuff, but if Deadlocked had just been allowed to not be a multiplayer, then they could have made another game that was just, really focused in on what made Ratchet great, like Ratchet 2, and then we could have had another Ratchet masterpiece. But instead we have this, it's a great game in many ways, but it's a bit experimental, and it's it's not, it doesn't have that, it doesn't have it, it's not a Ratchet 2, and I really would have preferred to have had a Ratchet 2, and I feel like Deadlock stole that from me. Skyrim was influenced by the Ice and Fire book, so that might be why there's more bad guy missions. Really? Yeah, it's him. Okay. Whew. Ratchet 2, yeah. But the Elden Ring DLC, I really like the whole Zhanja undertone throughout the whole thing, and I just got it that Golden Order is just Heaven's Will ripoff. I don't know about Zhanja. I don't know what that is. But I like the DLC. I should have made a video about the DLC, but I've just been really busy. I like the DLC though. It's the best thing FromSoft has made in a long time, I think. I think it's the best thing they've made since Bloodborne. It might be my favorite thing they've made since Dark Souls 1. It's really good. I really like it. Gonna have to deduct points for that Deadlock deck. I like it, but you would you not trade Deadlocked for another conventional PS2 Ratchet game of the quality of Ratchet 2? Get out of here, you're crazy. Are we talking about Naughty Dog games? Oh no, I'm not a big fan of those games. I like Crash Bandicoot, I like Jak and Daxter. The rest of their games, I think, not so great. Aesir, am I Finnish? No. I'm about to finish though. No, I'm Icelandic. Ridarion. But Ratchet in armor, man. Yeah, look, it's a cool armor, I'll give you that. He also does shoots his pistols gangsta style. Hear that, guys? Acer's been getting busy lately. Hey. Alright. Also, I don't want to slander Todd Howard too much, because I do want to pick his brains about quest design and stuff like that, and I think I could probably get him on. So I don't want him to have to discover the week after when the video releases that there's hours and hours of me just Todd Howard is a moron. Here's why I hate Todd Howard. I like Todd Howard. I don't love his games necessarily, but I think they're really interesting, and I think it's cool that there are still some people in the industry who get to make big, bold, creative games, or get to have power like that in the industry and get to design stuff like that. Whether or not I think those games land. But yeah, we gotta start winding things down. What if John Uncharted was a furry? Would you like it then? No. But Ratchet isn't a furry. He's a alien. Neither Con La Novia. Hey. That means Con the New. Nailed it. Yeah, DLC was a banger, for it had the highest highs, but the lows were... I don't really think it had many lows. I think the final fight was kind of a low. But I don't know. I don't knock the DLC for that much. Would have liked more to do... would have liked more NPCs, maybe. Maybe but then again, maybe not. I don't know. Slander, delete the bots. Yeah. I needed to bring up Yu-Gi-Oh when talking to Todd Howard. Oh, I could be like, Todd, listen, bro, I'm literally the greatest Yu-Gi-Oh player of all times. You testing me, bro? And he wouldn't know. He wouldn't know, but he would think. Would you like to design those quests? Would I like to design? I would love to design quests in a studio like this. You kidding me? I think it would be really fun. Short Sakurai video would end next time. Can't do it now. I don't want to do it now. I don't. I need to I need to get over, because if I watch another one, I'm gonna be stuck here for another 20 minutes discussing it. Oh, con la novia with the girlfriend. Yeah, yeah. That's what I said, right? What if The Last of Us had Crash characters in it? Uncharted 4 had Crash Bandicoot in it, and that was the best part of that game. Witnessing Aesir's blocking out Hippo-chan boss fight. No, see, I like that fight. It's complete ass, but it's one of those fights where you just summon the NPCs and then you just have fun wailing on this thing with way too much of a health pool. And it's like, that's fun. Also, it stuns pretty quickly, so if you can just jump attack it like 3 or 4 times in a row, you can pretty easily take it out. And also just stay on its ass. It doesn't do attacks there. Not really. We need more boss NPCs in the FromSoft games. That was probably my favorite part of the game, of the DLC, was that big NPC rumble at the end. It was like so cool. All these characters I've come to know, and I get to kill them. Have you ever played a Shadow Duel, Mr. Howard? Ever played a Shadow game? Like Priscilla. What's my email? It's on my thingy. Do you work for Bethesda? Give him 5,000 month job. The emoji. Give him 5,000 month job, man. Rival. Pretty cool. That's pretty cool. Now you better not sign me up to some dubious websites with this. Hey gang, maybe I just got a job. That would have been really funny if you had worked with Bethesda though, and you came here offering me a job, because this has just been me like complaining about Bethesda, and you're like, okay, then you come in here, genius, you do it better. There you go. That's my real email, by the way. Nobody abuse it. Play Shadow games, win Shadow prizes. I think I could defeat Todd Howard in any Shadow game. I think so. I think I have a greater willpower than he does, and I don't think Todd Howard has the power of friendship, but I do, with all of you people, all of you wonderful people. We would be playing the Shadow game, and we'd both be like losing our memories as we lose life points, but they'd also have like an extra penalty, so maybe we lose memories of the people we love, like when Joey and Merrick dueled. But Todd Howard, he doesn't love anybody, so he wouldn't lose any of those memories, but I would be losing my memory of you, all you beautiful people, and then I would like, have to hold on to those memories, and like, it would give me the strength to prevail. Oh, you have ex-Bethesda devs to test. That's so cool. Thank you. I'll check out the email when it's sent. Hey guys, I just got a job. I'll make sure to get the hand tattoo so you can remember the power of friendship. You better. We all get the hand tattoo, but it's like a gigantic smiley face because there's so many of us. But I'm gonna call it there. I need to take a shower, because I've been sitting in the chair for like 2 hours now on my back. Ooh, it's no good. I got one of those gamer backs, gang. It's a mess. Oh, Shadow the Hedgehog. Now that's a Shadow game. And I've played it. I saw a trailer for that when I was a kid. And Shadow has like a giant sword and he's like spinning around with a sword in his hand, and I thought that was so cool, and that's why I wanted it, and I got it for like Christmas or something, and it sucked so bad, but I think I beat it. I played it a lot anyways. And so I would have the edge on Todd Howard. Once again, Aesir gets the edge. But yeah, that's gonna be it. Thanks everybody for dropping by, and I'll try to do more streams. Also, I'm gonna start releasing more videos again. I know I probably say that too often, but this time I mean it. No lies. See ya. Bye.